Hello and welcome to this premium episode number 369. I'm Cornelius Fichtner. Premium means that this interview is reserved for you, our premium subscribers, so thanks for joining us today and for supporting the podcast with your subscription. And don't forget that you'll get PDUs just for listening. Please visit pm-podcast.com/PDU for the details and, of course, tell all your PMP friends about it. If you are a regular listener to the Project Management Podcast, then you have heard me say on many occasions that projects are the mechanism by which companies turn their vision and strategy into a reality. And it is us, the project managers, who are asked to bring these projects to a successful completion so that the business needs are met. This means that we project managers need a great deal of business acumen and business awareness. But many of us are accidental project managers who, at some point in our career, found ourselves to be quite shockingly thrust into the position of a project leader. We were taken by surprise back then when that happened, and now they suddenly tell us we also need all this awareness. Well, fear not, because Bruce Harpham is here to tell you how to grow your business know-how as a project manager. In this interview, we review what foundational skills you need, how to access internal business knowledge from your organization, and how to look for information and trends in the broader environment outside of the four walls of your company. Our goal is to help you grow the situational awareness that you as a project manager need day after day on your projects by adding business awareness. And now, please open your third eye and enjoy the interview. Hello, Bruce. Welcome back to the Project Management Podcast.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
We want to talk about how to grow business awareness as a project manager. But first, what is business awareness and why should any project manager care?
Well, I think it's important for four broad reasons. It lets you better understand and anticipate risk, which could undermine or kill your project success. Two, it lets you become more effective in the area of procurement. Could you buy differently or could you buy from someone else rather than just going to the same suppliers over and over again? Third would be sponsor engagement. An ongoing complaint I often hear from people at that kind of executive level is that people are kind of too buried in the weeds and they don't recalibrate when they're talking to me. And then the fourth point would be personal career development, which is that you want to be able to know what is going to be impacting the organization. Is your industry in decline? Might you want to make an exit early? Or is there a new trend that you could advocate for? Could you be the champion of agile in your organization? Because agile, well, it's very popular, is far from universal.
How important is business awareness to you personally on your own projects?
Yeah, I think it's important because it lets me see why does this project matter, and it enables me to communicate that better. So projects I've worked on include regulatory projects in the financial services industry. And the business awareness there is that regulatory agencies from the government are less tolerant of this industry taking a lot of risk. And my business awareness allows me to say, it's not just Regulation A or Regulation B. The overall message is that regulators are paying much more close attention than they were, let's say, 10 or 15 years ago. And we need to act with that expectation.
This is funny. Little side note here. When I started the Project Management Podcast 10, 11 years ago, that's actually what I was doing. Regulatory projects in the finance industry. I had no idea that we have that in common.
Oh, great.
Yeah. Would it be fair to say that even though business awareness is important and our projects are shaped and heavily influenced by the business environment, many of us project managers don't often enough act upon this?
I think it's a valid observation, and I think the reason that occurs comes down to incentives. People are not, just acting randomly. I think a lot of organizations, whether that be managers or clients, have in place short-term incentives. Deliver project A for me 3 months from now. Let's get it done and delivered, and then we keep going on. And the virtue of that is focus, which is certainly valuable. Where it can be problematic is that if the individual has no periodic effort to step back and look at a broader perspective to say, what is our whole portfolio of projects like? Are we doing the right kinds of projects? Have we really talked to executives about whether these projects are advancing the goals of the organization? So I think there's a short-term incentive to ignore those factors. And as far as it goes, that's reasonable. But I think that needs to be balanced with periodically taking that broader view.
To continue, we now want to delve into 3 dimensions of business awareness: foundational skills, internal knowledge, and also scanning the broader environment. But before we go into depth here, can you summarize each of these for us, maybe in a sentence or two, before we do really a deep dive, beginning with the foundational skills?
Sure. So I think particularly for PMs who are in a technology function or a supporting function, they may be in a very specialized area. A foundational skill that I think is important is to understand, how does money operate in the organization? If it's a company, what are the most important products? How do we make money? It may not be immediately obvious if you're in a specialized IT area. I think that's important in the foundational skills.
Then second, internal knowledge.
Yes, I think this takes 2 subcomponents. There's formal knowledge, just understanding things like the org chart. It may sound basic, but a lot of people will still miss to actually look at those in newsletters and announcements. And then an informal component around internal networking. And as an aside on that front, I delivered a webinar on internal networking to projectmanagement.com and over a year ago, and it's gotten something like 400 comments. So people seem to get really excited about this internal networking concept. And I think it's part of business awareness.
And then the third dimension, scanning the broader environment.
Right. So this is kind of based on an article that I wrote for my website called The New Strategy, which is that how do you understand what is going on in the rest of your industry? So I will actually deliberately choose only a limited number of publications that I read regularly, and we can go into those later. And I'm looking for both things that are directly related to my business. So what is the press saying about my company and our immediate competitors? And I periodically will also look very broadly. What is happening to a Google or a Procter & Gamble? There was something in the news today about how Procter & Gamble is scaling back on Facebook advertising because they no longer consider it as effective. And to me, that's an interesting trend because it suggests that this social platform, which has a lot of attention, may have some real business limitations.
All right, so much for the high-level overview. Now let's delve a lot more in depth here, beginning with the business awareness foundation, understanding decisions and money in your organization. Can you please develop the summary that you gave us about this? What else is important for us to understand when it comes to the foundational skills?
Sure. Understanding which products earn the greatest revenue is very important, and why certain areas may be growing. So to give an example here, to go back to the financial industry, since the financial crisis, I've seen a lot of banks increase the amount of wealth management business that they do, as opposed to loans, because it's perceived as a lower risk way to earn revenue and profit. So to me, that's an interesting pattern to look at, this growing interest there. Another area that I think is foundational is to look at what is senior management emphasizing in terms of their statements or activities. So, for example, is the CEO constantly flying out to the office in China to talk up the business there? Or is the CEO perhaps more internally focused because there's been some tumultuous developments internally? Looking at how the senior leaders are spending their time can be quite informative about what truly matters to them. Another two more areas are going to be patterns for decision making. And the key variable for me on this front is risk appetite. So on one end of the spectrum, you may have the kind of iconic startup, which has an 11 out of 10 risk appetite. They're willing to launch a product and have it fail, and they shut it down and try something else. If you're in that culture, then you can try a lot of new things very quickly. Versus if you're in, let's say, a 100-year-old company that is more concerned about protecting market share, they may still need innovation, but they need to have it presented to them through a governance process. And I think the business awareness there is to say, if you want to bring that innovative idea in, you can't just say, it's innovative, let's go do it, because that will be perceived as threatening or not meaningful. You need to present it in terms that are going to be meaningful. And then the financial health point is, at a basic level, understand, is the company in the black or in the red, meaning profitable or losing money? If the company is losing money, then that is going to impact what kinds of project activities are going to happen, and is likely going to color what happens when you go and ask for another $1 million.
Okay, so do you want us to observe senior management goals, analyze patterns for decision making, and learn the basics of our organization's financial health? Help me here, and let's bring this down to the absolute, the lowest possible question I can ask here. How on earth is this going to help me to be a better project manager?
Sure. So if we take the senior management goals as an example, if you're in an organization that has just had a very bad year in terms of their financial results, and there's a period of consolidation or regrouping, there will likely be diminished appetite for experimental initiatives or products. So that to me would have an implication for what kinds of projects do I want to volunteer to work on? Or what do I want to advocate during the annual project planning cycle? Because to a degree, one's individual career success is impacted by what kinds of work that you work on. If you work on something that is kind of a losing proposition, even if you do great work, it's going to be difficult to look at as a result. So that would be an example of how to translate that into day-to-day work. In terms of understanding what senior management wants, the reason that's important is that it will enable you to better translate what your project is trying to achieve to what the executive cares about. So it could be, we're doing this project because it will make the online product more stable. That matters because stability is a major point of complaint, and we're going to lose market share. And you stated in your Q2 message that market share was your number 2 concern. And that's why we're asking you to support this project.
Okay, we're moving on to the next dimension, the broader context, understanding your peers, your competitors. What's important to understand in this dimension?
So there's a few different ways to look at this. And I'll preface this by saying there's nothing wrong with kind of scaling this back depending on your capacity. So that's entirely fine. So what I think for a good minimum floor as a bare minimum would be to understand your company and its immediate competitors. Now, the wrinkle to this is that your competitors may not be immediately obvious to you. So the example that I'll return to is the banking industry, because it's an industry I know well. So banks are now being competed by what are called non-bank companies. Amazon has a payments product. PayPal has a payments product. There are startups that will offer investment services and lending products. So your competitors may not be the traditional ones that you're deeply familiar with. And the idea there is to look at, are your competitors doing something that you need to match to maintain market share? Or could that be a source of inspiration? So I think that's That's a good baseline. And once you have a firm grasp on that, we go to the next level, which is looking further afield for best practices in innovation. And I can continue on that front.
Go ahead. Yes, please.
All right. So a key practice that I think is still not widely understood is to look for practices from another industry and bring them in. So Apple, for example, is known for having quite an effective retail store presence, but that was not always something that they had. And in fact, they have patents relating to the design of their stores, which is something quite striking because that's how much emphasis they've placed on that. So if you're a company that has retail locations as well, you could look at what is this technology company that is only a fairly new entrant to the retail space. What are they doing that you could bring in? Another example that I think is interesting is to look at what are companies that are leading in the convenient customer service area, and how easy is it for customers to work with you? Is it a lot of manual interaction? Do they have to call and wait on the line for half an hour to do anything? There's still a lot of companies where that's true, but other companies are becoming much more successful in terms of self-serve. So I think looking to another industry and borrowing their ideas can be quite powerful. Another area that I think is understated because people don't want to dive into the details is that people will sometimes talk about best practices in a somewhat vague way, which is okay as far as it goes. But I think there's a lot more opportunity to look at what are companies or projects that have won awards from organizations you respect. So to take it down to kind of brass tacks, a PMI gives awards for Project of the Year, and I've covered some of these. I wrote an article about what Chevron, the energy company, did as a project that won recognition to refine or upgrade an oil refinery in California. And the energy industry is not one that I know in great depth, but they did fantastic work in terms of their stakeholder management strategy because they had to move very large energy infrastructure kind of in the middle of the night through California to get it to this facility. So I think there can be a lot of value in studying who has been recognized for excellence, even if they're not in your immediate industry, and what insights can you bring in from that. And then I think the final point I would make in this area is to take a broader perspective on emerging threats. This, in some ways, it is somewhat speculative, but I think sometimes the way people look about risk is backward-looking only, to say X is not a risk until there's some company out there that has lost money as a result. And if you limit risk to that definition only, then you're going to miss things. You might not understand what is the impact of certain kinds of hacking or cybercrime potentially, or extreme weather events, kind of those black swan category. So that would be that kind of advanced level of awareness in that area.
Okay, so all of the examples that you've given us are at a very high level, business oriented. Let's break this down again to the project managers who are listening to this. How is this kind of understanding helping us in our projects to become better project managers, to become better project leaders?
Sure. So I'll return to some of the points I made toward the beginning, which is that this can improve your risk management substantially. So making sure that you capture all of the important risks in your project and that you have ways to manage them. So your business awareness could go beyond something basic like instead of just buying insurance, you have some exploratory meetings with some up and coming vendors who could be an interesting alternative. And that could be an ongoing part of your project management kind of activity. You might say, an hour a month, I do some online research for vendors if procurement is very important to your project. Not looking to buy anything right now, but just to expand my awareness of what's available so that if, let's say, the big tech company that I'm used to working with suddenly has new management and they decide they don't want to work with companies like me, that I have some possibilities for alternatives. And the other way that I think this can be very powerful is in better connecting to executives and senior managers, because you will be more likely to say, we should do this project because it relates to the industry trend where other companies are gradually eating away our payments business, rather than just saying, we need to upgrade to version 12 of our payments platform. The executive might say, well, why do I care? Well, you should care because the existing platform is clunky and we look bad in comparison to PayPal, and we need to upgrade so that we don't lose that market share.
Okay, we talked about the foundation skills, the internal knowledge, and also scanning the broader environment here. Let's talk tools. What are some of the tools that can help us? And maybe, you can talk about external business awareness resources that will help us to understand that, and also some online tools, maybe.
Sure. So, in terms of scanning the horizon, there's three tools that I like. The first two are free. I believe the third one is a paid resource. Google Alerts and Google News can both be very helpful. And the way that I like to use Google Alerts is to set up alerts based on my company name and maybe the 3 or 4 most important competitors, and configure the tool to send me links to articles on a weekly basis. Now, that can be very helpful. For a more expansive look, there's a website called Alltop, Alltop, which is, I believe it describes itself as an online magazine rack. And that can be helpful because it allows you to kind of browse quickly between a wide variety of topics. And then the third resource, and this is, I think, for someone who wants to go to that kind of advanced level, is called Meltwater, as in what happens to ice when you leave it in the sun, meltwater. And this is kind of an advanced market research kind of tool. So if you're looking at, doing business with a new company and you didn't really know a lot about them, Meltwater can be helpful in doing additional research on that company. So those would be a couple of good tools that I would suggest.
Yeah, I'm actually using Google Alerts myself for a little bit of ego surfing. Whenever somebody mentions Cornelius Fichtner anywhere on the web, I get an alert. Very easy in my particular case because it's it's a singular name. There's only one Cornelius Fichtner in the world. So that works rather well. But if your name, of course, is John Smith, then setting a Google alert is a bit more difficult there. Any other tools you like, by any chance?
Just one aside there. My wife shares the same name as a British member of Parliament, so she
Oh,
does the same thing, and she will sometimes get those alerts as well, which is kind of interesting. Um,
yeah.
but some additional tools. I did do some further research in this, and there's kind of a whole suite of additional tools, but they're really aimed at people that work in public relations and kind of media relations. So they didn't seem as much of a good fit. RSS readers can be a good tool to use here as well, but they require a little bit more upfront effort to kind of build your database of who you consider to be good sources.
Which of these three dimensions that we talked about is most important for a project manager?
So I think it's most helpful to really understand the state of your industry, um,
Hmm.
and the financial performance that goes with that. So to understand, are you number 3 in your industry and declining versus you're number 2 and you're almost number 1. I think that can be very helpful because as much as those sound like kind of abstract ideas, I think they do manifest in how confident people are to expand and try new things. So I think those can be very helpful.
And which of these three dimensions is most difficult for a project manager to grasp? And of course, while you're talking about it, how do you personally overcome this difficulty and make it part of yourself as a project manager?
Right. I think it's a great point. Where I think it's most challenging can be to have that expansive attitude towards risk, because most kind of risk assessment tools are designed to be backward looking, which is perfectly fine. All I'm saying is that it's an incomplete picture. I do occasionally struggle in that area, but what I like to do is to say, every trend begins somewhere. And if we're not proactive and come up with some alternatives, then managing this risk will only get more difficult over time. It's not an argument I may win every single time, but I think that can be a value add that a good PM is bringing to the picture, is to have that broader view of risk, for example.
You mentioned networking earlier in our discussion, and I'd like to shift out for a few moments into that area. How important is my network of business contacts in all of this in order to, grow my business awareness?
Well, there was a book by the title of Your Network is Your Net Worth that came out a few years ago, I think by Gail Porter. And that's one way of looking at it. So it will depend a little bit on what your goals are and what your kind of employment situation is. I know a lot of people in my area who are freelance or contract based project managers, as in they will run a project for 6 months, billing out at whatever, $200 an hour or whatever it may be, and then they're done, and then they're kind of looking for the next assignment. If that's you, then, networking should be on your agenda for some period of time every single day because it's important for your career development and so on. If, on the other hand, you're a corporate employee, you can probably throttle back a little bit, but not to zero. And the reason for that is your relationships and understanding people and what do people in the organization want will impact your ability to connect with them. A classic limitation that most project managers face is that they can't, quote unquote, order someone to work on their project. They have to kind of negotiate for it in many cases. But if you understand that top-notch developer really wants to build their skills with, say, iOS app development, and that's important to what they want to do next, and you have some of that, then you can appeal to that person in a way that is meaningful to them. So networking needs to have that depth, I think, to provide the greatest value for you and the people that you're working with.
How do you personally like to grow your network?
I think what has been the most valuable for me has been going to events, both locally and abroad. So, for example, of course, I had purchased several of Cornelius's products, but I had the pleasure of meeting him in Orlando, Florida, in 2015 at a conference, which was great. And there's still something uniquely special about that kind of interaction. I once heard conferences or in-person interaction as described as the least crowded channel, and I think there's still a lot to that. So I'm an active member of my University Alumni Association and my PMI chapter, and a couple of other things kind of as they come up. So I think those can be quite powerful. And I do find LinkedIn can be valuable, but it's not magical. You still have to kind of put some effort into it for it to be worthwhile.
Yeah, I just opened up my LinkedIn account. At this very moment,
Okay.
I have 4,860 connections. Right. I may be a bit extreme here because I'm, so active in the project management space. Not everybody will have that many, but
Sure.
Still, it'll be a lot of connections that many people have. How on earth are we going to stay in touch with all of these people?
Well, I think there's going to be some kind of segmentation. The segmentation is going to be based on a few factors. There's an anthropologist called Dunbar who came up with this concept of Dunbar's number, which roughly suggests that humans seem to have the capacity to have really substantial relationships with a maximum of about 150. And some people will quote to say it should be higher or lower. It sounds roughly accurate to me. So what does that mean in practice? That you need to make some choices about who do I want to put my attention on. So what does that mean in practice for me? I maybe have a list, and sometimes at various points in my career, it has been written out. These are 20 professional contacts that I'd like to get to know better. and I will step up my efforts, meaning a greater quantity of phone calls, a greater quantity of emails, one-to-one. In other cases, I have more of a one-to-many approach. So I have an email newsletter, for example, that I send to my subscribers on a weekly basis. And it's a little less warm, you could say. And that's sad, perhaps, in a certain way. But I think it's also reasonable to say we have to recognize we have limited capacity and make some choices.
One thing that I learned early on in regards to networking is you don't expect people to help you. You reach out and help. So you proactively do something for the people in your network in order to show them your value and that you appreciate them. What type of clues do you look for in your network in order to help people?
Well, I think it's an excellent point. Um, I think some people stumble a little bit on implementing this because they're kind of just stuck about, well, what does the person want? I don't want to guess the wrong thing. And that's okay. So I think there needs to be a little bit of flexibility to sometimes just ask, what are you working on this year? So periodically I'll say to people that I meet, one of my goals for this year is I'm running my first marathon. What are you working on? It's just something, it's kind of a personal project I'm working on. And it kind of opens the conversation a little bit. Sometimes people will be more direct with you. They might say, I'm looking with a new job for a new job. I'm going to be having coffee with someone on 2 days from now to see what I can do to help him. So I think proactively going out and just asking can be helpful. In other cases, try to imagine themselves in your spot or in their shoes rather. So for example, if somebody just had their, first book come out, then support that. A friend of mine kind of locally here had a project management book come out called PM for the Masses. And I actually signed up to support it on Kickstarter to help him with the funding for that. And that to me is an example of networking. The value I'm providing is literally money to help him with kind of get this project going. So it doesn't have to be rocket science. You can just ask if somebody is fundraising for a charity, donate. I've done that for friends and both people that I'm wanting to get to know better. So there's a few different ways.
PM for the Masses, that's Jamal, right?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, and our listeners just sort of looking into the future can look forward to an interview with Jamal about the topic PM for the Masses. Back to our interview here at hand. I've already asked this question quite twice, and I'm going to ask it again
Okay.
about networking. How does all of this networking relate back to me improving my business awareness as a project manager?
Right. So I think the business awareness can be at the level of both the project and your career. So let's look at both. So at the level of the project where you're working on today, networking means, in part to me, the quality and depth of your relationships on the project. So if somebody is late on delivering something, if you have a good relationship with them, you can get them more easily to open up to you and explain, what is going on. They've been trying to kill some bugs for, a week. And having that good quality relationship will let you have a better awareness to what other people in the project are doing, as opposed to viewing them as resources in a project management software. So the awareness is, in that case, better understanding what are the people doing, as opposed to viewing them as kind of interchangeable resources. And then at the career level, it matters for both what are the next projects that you're going to work on. Might you want to maybe move to another PMO where there's some new or interesting opportunities that you can move on? So those are a few ways.
Let's make this personal. How has it helped you in your career?
Sure. So when I finished university some years ago, my very first professional assignment came through networking, and it was very unexpected. It was literally my neighbor, the person living next door, was a consultant to a small investment company that needed assistance with knowledge management, which is an area that I'd worked on. And that person introduced me to one of the executives there. And part of the reason that could happen was that I was open about my goals. I'm looking for an opportunity. And that person then was able to make a connection for me. Another more recent example is that I joined an internal employee engagement committee quite explicitly, just to get to know people from other parts of the organization. And that has led to me having the opportunity to work on some new projects and develop some new skills. So that has been a couple of ways that I've put this into action.
There is a lot to learn and there's a lot to know. How do we project managers best incorporate this as part of our ongoing learning and growing?
Sure. So I'd like to maybe suggest a few simple habits. First, in the area of business awareness, assuming you use a calendar to manage your daily work, which I would hope you would do, I would suggest putting a weekly reminder. I like to use Friday morning or whatever is kind of a downtime for you. 15 minutes recurring appointment. Read the corporate intranet. Have there been any new letters from the CEO or important executives? And you just have that as a reminder to read that. So that gives you some of that internal awareness. The second tip would be in terms of the broader industry awareness. I would suggest subscribing to one business publication. So currently for me right now, that's The Economist. I think that's a good one. There are others. And then a final one relating to networking, particularly in-person networking, is print business cards. I know it sounds low tech, but it makes a difference. When you meet someone and you're trying to scribble their name down on the, in your notebook versus handing a card. I use a company called moo.com. There are many others, of course. It makes a difference. It makes me feel more confident in networking and more likely to go to events and benefit from them.
Okay, and before we move on to the final set of questions here, I'd like to give you an update. I now have 4,863 connections in LinkedIn. Great. Yeah, it's quite humbling to see how many people want to connect with me in LinkedIn. It's absolutely incredible. Okay, so to close our interview here, let's begin and let's help our listeners and let's begin small here. What are 3 areas of business awareness that every project manager should think about when starting a new project?
Okay, very good. So I think first of all, the organizational financial health is still very important. So let's say you work for a publicly traded company. What was the last quarter results? Were they up or down? Because that will really shape, what do executives think and what are they willing to fund, or how kind of open-minded are they feeling? So that's one that's very helpful. The second is to look at your risk categories and examples more broadly than you might normally do. So that would be 2. And then the third one would be, as you're getting started, can anyone in your network help you with a simple question to help you get started planning? So let's say you're working on a technology you've never worked on before. Can you do a search of your connections on LinkedIn to see, do I know anyone who's worked on Oracle technology? Great. Send them an email and say, can we have a 10-minute call to talk about it? I think sometimes people think that networking has to always be asking for huge favors like find me a job tomorrow. And that's maybe part of it. But it could also be, I'm starting this new project. It involves technology I haven't worked on. What are some things that you could tell me to get me started?
And what if the project has already started? Because most of our listeners, project managers, right in the middle of a project, right? They may not be starting a new one tomorrow and be able to apply these. Can we go back? Can we revisit these? Would you recommend anything else?
Well, I think if you're parachuted into a project, your network can be a major source of assistance. Let me see here. Another way that you could use this once your project is going in terms of business awareness is making sure that you recalibrate how you talk about the project to different people. So, do you have the right awareness to be able to talk to a developer or an analyst at the level of details, or to be able to ask them some good questions? And do you understand what the executive wants to hear? Are they an analytical person? Do they want to see a detailed spreadsheet? Or do they more just want that, 3-color update? If the project's green, they don't want to hear anymore. So that would be an example of awareness while a project is underway.
Excellent. Bruce, thank you so much for introducing us to how to grow our business awareness and making us more aware.
Great.
And that was how to grow your business acumen and business awareness as a project manager with Bruce Harpham. And that's it. Thank you very much for listening. As always, you can find us on the web at pm-podcast.com. Please send your emails to info@pm-podcast.com, and when you write, please do tell me where in the world you are writing from. And finally, we have this quote from Edward Deming. Profit in business comes from repeat customers. Customers that boast about your projects or services and that bring friends with them. Until next time.